Hey guys, I am doing a review today of this Kilz Max Latex Primer, and it actually makes some pretty impressive claims about its performance. It's supposed to be one of their better stain and odor blocking primers. It is latex, but let's look at the back here and see what it says about its use. It says, Kilz Max is a new generation water-based primer, sealer, and stain blocker, offering performance of traditional oil and shellac-based primers. It tackles tough stains, including severe water damage, rust, smoke, nicotine, grease, tannin, ink, pencil, felt marker, pet stains, and more. Kilz Max also seals persistent pet, food, and smoke odors. Use on interior surfaces, including drywall, woodwork, plaster, masonry, brick, painted metal, ceramic tile, glass, and most other glossy surfaces. Top coat with latex or oil-based paint used to block odors from subfloor when replacing carpet or wood flooring. So it does make some pretty impressive claims here. It's saying that this latex primer has the same performance capacity as oil and shellac primers out there, and if you've ever done a little bit of research on those kind of primers, you'd find that they're the more recommended ones for severe stains and odors, and a lot of people have not had a lot of good success with latex-based primers for those kinds of problems. So if it does indeed live up to the claims of being just as good as oil or shellac in that sense, that's really, really great, because as many of you know, shellac and oil-based have very, very strong odors and fumes, and you really need to be working in a ventilated area if you're going to be using those, and that is not really practical for me right now because I'm painting in the winter and I really don't want to work in the cold. So if I can get away with using a latex primer, that would be awesome. So I'm going to be trying this out today and seeing if it works. It was a pretty expensive primer. I bought it for just a little bit over $40, so I really, really hope it works. However, I did buy it from a place that said that they would take it back if it did not perform like it claimed it would. Now, what I have up here, I have my situation here is I'm painting the ceiling in this room, and I did have some pretty severe water staining going on up there. I've already tried using, here, let me see if I can find it. I already tried using this primer down here, a couple coats of it, in fact, on a couple of the worst water stains. It was this Kilz 2. You can't even see it because I painted over it. And it's Kilz 2 latex primer, and it's probably more of a middle of the line latex primer, so I'm not really surprised that it didn't really do the job on some of the worst stains. So maybe this isn't the most fair review of all, considering that I've already tried a couple layers of primer on certain spots, but the fact that the stains bled right through it and they're almost as dark as they were before, I would say is still a pretty good starting point. I also felt, to be completely fair to this product, we probably should look at the instructions a little bit on here. I've already read through it. I wanted to point out a few parts that I felt were kind of important. Right here under stain blocking, it says, after priming, test for stain bleed through by applying the top coat to a small section. If the stain bleeds through the top coat, apply a second coat of primer and test again before top coating the entire area. If bleeding continues, a longer dry time is needed before top coating. And then also down here on dry time, to the touch, it should be dry in 30 minutes and to recoat in 1 hour. So, I have heard some things online where it said that primer is not necessarily meant to cover up the stain, it's mostly meant to seal it. So, in all fairness, I am not sure that I should make my final judgment based on before I put real paint over the primer. I probably should make my final judgment after I use paint, and then maybe even if it shows through, do a second coat of primer and try top coating it again like it says, because its claims can only really be judged if you follow the directions completely. So final judgment will be after at least 2 coats of this primer and top coat of paint. And I will wait at least an hour, if not more, between all these coats. So I will come back and I will show you what my results were. Okay, so in this photo we have each of the 3 stains that I chose to test with the Kilz Max Primer. And I would probably say that stain 1 and stain 3 are probably the worst of all 3 of the stains, but in my estimation, they're all pretty bad. Now, there are a couple things I'd like y'all to keep in mind when I'm showing you the results. First of all, each stain, as I stated before, started with 1 or 2 coats of Kilz 2 primer. I didn't really keep track of which stains had how many coats of it. I mean, there was only maybe 1 or 2 on any of them at any given time. So I know that there is a chance that this could have given the Kilz Max an advantage or a head start, but I really don't think it made that much of a difference since, I mean, the stains came through just as bad with the Kilz 2 primer. So I really think that this is a pretty good test of the Kilz Max. Now, second, I did try to take photos as consistently as possible, but I know that there may be variations in white balance or the vantage point. So keep this in mind when you're looking at the photos, and probably most of all, just take my word for it when I describe the photos. I promise you I'm telling you this accurately. I don't have any kind of advantage really one way or the other. Other than that, I really do hope it works because I paid a lot of money for this. So what I say is definitely true. And third, I did leave plenty of time in between the coats of primer and paint to dry. In some instances, I left entire days in between the coats so that there won't be any chance of someone saying that I didn't leave enough time for things to dry in between. And then finally, after all the final coats where I was satisfied with the result, I did wait, and I came back 2 days later just to make sure that there wasn't any sort of delayed bleed through, and there wasn't. So I'm not an expert in stain behavior, so it's not to say that bleed through couldn't still happen down the line in the future, but I am pretty cautiously optimistic. Okay, in this second picture, we have our stain 1, and it was a pretty bad stain. As you can see, it did take 2 coats of primer and 2 coats of paint to completely cover the stain, but once it did, none of the stain showed through at all. So I am pretty pleased with that. Okay, in our second picture here, well, I guess it would be our third, we have our second stain, and as you can see at the very start, we had this one probably had maybe 1 coat of Kilz 2 on it. This one also probably took, well, it did take 2 coats of Kilz Max and 2 coats of paint. After the first coat of paint, it barely showed through, but I felt like it really could take a second coat, and so that is what I ended up doing, and the stain after the second coat of paint didn't show through at all. So once again, very pleased. Alright, and the final stain, or stain 3, I think after the results occurred, I figured this one was probably the worst stain at all, of all. This one actually did start out with several coats of Kilz 2, and you can see that stain just comes right through. And even after the second coat of primer and Kilz, or second coat of primer and paint, the stain did show through just a tiny bit. So I felt like we probably ought to try a third coat, so I'll show you in the next picture. Alright, this last picture here shows the third stain on the third coat of Kilz Max and the third coat of paint, and it did end up finally completely covering the stain all the way through. So I was very happy that it was able to do it. So I guess the question is does this latex primer do just as good of a job as a shellac based primer or oil based? And well, it really depends on what you're comparing. If you're comparing its ability to cover the stain entirely, then yes, I actually do feel like this did just as good of a job. But on the other hand, could a shellac cover a stain in one coat? That is a very good possibility. And this one, on the worst stain of all, did in fact take three coats of primer and paint to do the trick. Now, two of the stains only took 2 coats, and the instructions did in fact say that it could very well take 2 coats. On that last one, I really did have to do a third coat, so that does push it a little bit beyond what the directions said its abilities were. But in the end, it did do what it said it would do. Now, the 2 or 3 coats, you might be saying, well, that's a lot of primer to use for. That's a lot of money to spend on something you have to use 2 or 3 coats of, and I might kind of agree with that, but you have to remember that most of the time you're not going to be using that many coats to cover up what you need to. Most of the time it's just going to take 1 coat to cover things. It's only when you have really bad stain, which is usually concentrated to a very small area like I did, that you might have to. So you're really not using that much extra primer than you would with a shellac. So and the benefits of being able to work in a closed ventilated area is worth it to me. So I'm very happy, and if I ever do have problems with the bleeding through in the future, I'll make sure to come back and say so in a comment or something. But for now, I am optimistic, and I am going to say that this probably is a pretty good alternative if you're willing to give up, some of the benefit of being able to do it like maybe in 1 coat with a shellac. So hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks.